Shalom and welcome to another edition of Our Daily Bread. I'm Messianic Torah, and this week's parashah is the 12th parashah of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis, and it's called Vayechi, which means "and he lived." In this week's parashah, my message for 2025 is called Ensuring Life. And in this week's parashah, what we get is we start off with this story of, Yaakov's time to die, and he first off asks Yosef to come and promise that he won't bury him in Mitzrayim, but he wants him to bury him with his fathers in the cave in the field of Machpelah. Now, this goes to my first point of my message this year, which is called Resting Where You Belong. And in this kind of little segment, it's interesting because we start off the parashah with this idea of Vayechi, and he lived. And just as it was with Parashat Sarah, which is Sarah's life, was actually about Sarah's death. And so, there's a little pattern of the life being associated with death, and that's an interesting thing, actually. So, one of the things that I think is interesting is this idea of not resting in Mitzrayim. And really, it reminds me of the verse where it says there's no rest for the wicked. Well, Mitzrayim, which means oppression, and is also in the Remez, or spiritual definitions, a model of the world, overruled by the ruler of the world, which would be Satan. And so you have this model that showcases here that Yaakov doesn't want to be laid to rest in Mitzrayim. And not only is it not their land, it's not their resting place. So we have this idea of this return. And so if we think about Yaakov's life, we see that, at the end of Yaakov's life, it's kind of focusing on return. And even when we get to Yosef, and, it talks about him, at the end where he, gave up the spirit, and we see the stuff with Yaakov, that he's going to return to his fathers. And it's always this idea of resting where you belong. And even the concept of Shabbat, of rest, is something that it says is a sign between Yorewahe and his people. And, this is this special rest. The very rest is a sign and a connection between God and his people. So how you do the Shabbat, how you do the Sabbath, matters. And it's a connection that is unique and that is tied to that connection, just like a family, just like Yaakov's resting place. And so, here's Yaakov in Mitzrayim, but he doesn't belong to Mitzrayim. He doesn't want to rest in Mitzrayim. He wants to rest back in his resting place. And I think that's an important distinction for everybody, that, you can live among the world, you can be in a place, and it's okay to not belong or fit in, because this is about this family. Family has a unique connection that other things don't. Other people don't have that same connection and that bond. And no matter where you're at, your family, even if they're scattered all over the place, still has a unique connection compared to everybody else. And they're going out and they're living among the world, and they're separated by distance, but the tie, the bond that holds them together goes beyond all those things. And so it's the same kind of way, this promise of this rest, this connection to family. I think all of these things are important, and that's how we start this week's parashah. This idea of ensuring life is that the life is connected to the land. The life is connected to the family. The life is connected to the promises and the future promises, the spiritual promises that go beyond the physical world. And this physical world is not the place where you want to rest. If anything, this is the place of work. This is the place where, you're not going to be comfortable. You're not going to find all the things that you're looking for. If you are, then you're probably looking for the wrong things. And, this idea of ensuring life is literally what, when we get into the next part, which is called 3 generations. When we look at Yaakov, he's the third part of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, right? That's 3 generations, because it wasn't just enough to have a child, right? It says that he made the covenant with Avraham because he knew he would diligently teach his children and his children's children after him. So you have, again, a mention that the entire covenant, the promises of God that everyone's trying to get with the book, with the Bible, whether it's Christian or Jewish or Messianic, they're all trying to tie into these promises of the kingdom, of the promised land. This Avrahamic promise was made, it says, not because of faith, not because of belief. There's lots of things it could have said. It didn't say any of those things. It said that he made the covenant with him because he knew he would teach his children. He would diligently teach his children and his children's children after him. So you have the fact that one generation is not enough. You have to teach it to your children, but you have to teach them to teach it to their children. And if you do that, if everybody does that, it goes on forever, right? Olam Vayed. So it's important to think about that third generation. So many people, even when they're parenting, they only think about the next generation, right? Because they're going to die. So if they're alive during the time they have children, then at the point that those two are both alive, right? Most people get that. And they think that that's it. And half the time, in the ways of the world, the father does one thing, the son does another. Oh, they're their own person. I'm my own person. People are all selfish. Parents are selfish. They want to go hang out. They want to go to the movies. They want to do the things they did before they have kids. Because it's about them. And, their kids are many times an inconvenience. The kids are very much, as long as I keep them from, messing themselves up and get them through till they're 18, then kick them out, and then life is their problem. And then you get back all that. And you see with people who aren't taking their roles serious, they don't even take it serious during those first 18 years. They're shipping off their kids to, public schools. Everybody's heard the horror stories of public schools and things going on there. And yeah, use common sense. If you send your kids off to strangers, half of whom you've hardly ever met, in a system that you don't understand, teaching things that you're not sure what they're teaching, and then you think there's going to be a good outcome? Your children are your future. They're the insurance of continued life. And you got to put a little more due diligence than just saying, well, I dropped them off school, I'm sure they're going to be fine. Most people who've gone to public schools understand there's a lot going on. A lot of crazy stuff among the kids, among the teachers. There's all kinds of craziness there. And I think that, you have to be aware, because what happens is everyone becomes aware after something bad happens. they got into drugs, or there's bullying going on, or there's something weird going on with a teacher or some, who knows. But the fact is when you take your precious child and you drop them off at a location to be taken care of by strangers and around other kids which you don't know, and in environments you don't understand, you in my opinion, that's taking on a huge risk. And then when bad things happen, they're like, "Oh, I'm so shocked." And it's like, "Are you?" Because you kind of could have calculated that out. I think by just looking at that scenario, people are way too trusting. I see it all the time. You go down the street, you're driving down the street, and kids are walking home from school. Little tiny kids, little tiny girl, little tiny boy, sometimes walking by themselves. Anybody could drive up and just grab that kid, and you'd never see him again. There's no parent there. They're just like, "Oh, they're fine." They walked home when they were kids. Well, things change. Times change. They aren't the same as they used to be. And even when they used to be, bad things happened. But probably more bad things happen now. And so you have to treat that child like that's your future. Would you take all your life savings and just kind of set it down somewhere and then walk off and hope that it's going to be there and then no one will take it or do anything with it? Are you going to, just hand it to a stranger that, you just met and think, well, I'm sure, it's fine? No. People, when they're dealing with a lot of money, are very careful. They're very careful. They triple check. They double, triple check. They don't do stupid stuff most of the time with their money. But they do much more stupid things with their children. And I think they put their children at risk a lot of times. And, so we see here in this week's parasha, when we get to this promise, this is all about family this week. You see Yaakov, you see his children, you see Yosef, you see the little situation with Yosef and his brethren, where it appears that they lie and tell him, "Oh, our father wanted you to forgive us," and all that. They're still worried. You see, a thief thinks like a thief. It's like I say, a cheater is the one who's always worried someone's cheating on them. Because they're thinking those thoughts. They're thinking that, "Oh, if I went to the store, I was gone for too long, or if I went out to do this and that." That's their mentality. So that's the ones who are accusing the other person, their spouse or whatever, of cheating all the time. A lot of times it's because they have the mind of a cheater. You know what I mean? They might just be aware, and that's probably a good thing. But a lot of times in relationships, you see that it's an unhealthy situation, and that's because they're thinking that way. Because the person who's not cheating at all is not thinking that way. The thief is not walking by going, "Oh, wow, look, I could take that." Or actually the thief is thinking that. I said they're not thinking that. The thief does think that way. But if you're not a thief, you're not walking by somebody's who left their wallet sitting out going, "Oh, wow, I could take that." If anything, on the other side, if you're doing what's right, you're thinking, well, that person shouldn't leave their wallet like that because somebody else is going to come by and think that way and take their stuff. And it's too bad. It's too bad that people are that way. Life is, on a total side note, life is definitely difficult enough for everybody. You shouldn't want to take what belongs to somebody else. Because if you've had a difficult life, if you've worked hard for anything, you understand that people work hard for their stuff. And to go through all the trouble of working for something, earning something, and trying to have enough success and get past all the failures till you finally can do something for yourself, get something for yourself, and then have somebody else who doesn't want to do the work come and just take that thing from you. That's just terrible. That's just beyond lazy. So, family is important. We're talking about 3 generations of people, which means that you have to think more broadly. When you're raising your children, you need to be thinking about raising your grandchildren. You need to be teaching your children when they're young how they're going to find a spouse, what's a good spouse, what's a bad spouse, how they're going to raise their kids. Are you going to teach them? Did you give the good habits to them and set the example? And then that's just not enough, because you have to actually teach them the desire to want to teach their children that. And that means having those conversations all the time. Not when they're about to have kids. You should have had those conversations with your daughters when they were 3 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, 16 years old. When they're ready to get married, their whole life they know what a good man is, what a bad man is. They know what good habits are, what bad habits are. They know the importance of keeping the Torah, of doing their Torah study, of thinking about the commandments, of not getting too busy or being too late for their prayer. All these kind of things. I see it all the time. People say, "Oh, it's just teenagers. Oh, kids do what they want to do." Yeah, that is true. There's an element of that. But don't let that be an excuse for laziness. You need to do your job as a parent to do a good job parenting. So by the time they get challenged, and some of your kids could go off the rails, but if you've done what you should have done, set a good example, gave them good habits, taught them the Torah, help them understand what's evil out there in the world and why it's evil. If you've done all of that, then the rest is on them. If they crash and burn, they're into their own territory. And some people got to learn the hard way, and some people, go willingly and try not to mess up. Other people, they got to hit every bump in the road in order to learn something, and you're going to learn that every kid's different. And, they could be raised in the same home, have totally different outcomes. And so it's not just about the parenting. But you got to do your due diligence, because there's a lot of parents who aren't really doing their due diligence. And the less good work that you do, the more likelihood that random or bad outcomes will happen. I feel like, you got to prepare them as best you can. And we're talking here about the 3 generations. So you can't just parent your kid. You really got to teach them, since the time they're a kid, how to be a good parent. And the first thing is, what are they seeing you do? Because if you're all over the place, if you're sitting there smoking cigarettes and then telling them, don't smoke, smoke is bad for you, it ain't going to happen, because you're a hypocrite. You got to, for a lot of people, they're not a very good example, right? And then on top of it, obviously they're gonna watch what you do more than what you say. But those things should be congruent. And if they're congruent, again, you're going to do everything you can. And it still might not work out. That's the cold, hard facts. You've seen people come from incredible homes, wonderful, loving parents, every resource they need, all that, and they crash and burn and go down bad paths. You've seen other people come from the worst start, terrible family life, no resources, all that, turn out to be absolutely amazing. So as a parent, you try and do your best that you can, but you can't, take out the variable that is the children's choices, right? That's what makes all of us unique, is that we all get to make our own choices. And that's another thing I see a lot of times, even with religious families, things can go sideways because, I tell my kids, I know why I love God. But you have to find your own love for God, right? The story, it's a relationship. And just like siblings, you know, they're all children of their father, but they'll make their own relationships with each other. And each of their relationships with their father is unique and different. It's just not cookie cutter. And so you have to establish that. And I think just awareness is the first real level, which is the awareness that it's not there by default. I think a lot of religious families, they think just because the person's around prayers, because they're seeing it, they're doing all this stuff, that somehow it just through osmosis happens. It doesn't quite work that way. It can on the surface, but if every kid doesn't find, and that includes a husband and wife, if they don't each have a strong personal connection to God, then all the prayers in the world, all the services, all the songs, all the Bible study you want, it's not going to really do that. Because, as a matter of fact, I think that's the opposite. I think I've seen a lot of people where the kids, they just weren't that connected. They didn't understand why. They did all the stuff growing up, but it didn't mean anything to them. If it doesn't mean anything, it's not going to last. You know, as it says, train up a child the way they should go, and they will not soon depart from it. So, you know, you gotta think those 3 generations. You gotta try and make sure that your children get it, but then they get how they're going to teach that to their children. And it has to, you know, you want to be 18 years deep, you know, of teaching him by the time they're 18, right? You don't want to start. I just see so many people, they don't do anything, kid goes off the rails, and then they're like, oh, well, I mean, they're teenagers, what do you expect? And it's like, well, I expect that if you're raising daughters, that you don't teach them about guys or good guys, or what a good guy is, a good man, and what a bad man is. You don't teach them about that when they're 18, or, you know, or a year after they figure it out on their own the hard way. So, like, you got to have those conversations, you know. And this is how, you know, going to this topic, you ensure life, right? Your children are the continuation of your life. And there's a lot of things, a lot of difficulties. It's a big, harsh world out there. You got to prepare them as best you can. And that doesn't necessarily mean sheltering. I think there's times that sheltering is absolutely smart as far as things that they shouldn't be exposed to, things that are evil, and for their own good and protection, and let them grow up and develop their understanding and their mind, and, you know, the basic things. But I think that a lot of parents also, they just shelter them away from as much as possible. If you shelter them away, that does provide a level of protection. But if you never teach them to deal with the evil that's in the world, and they don't understand it, then sometimes they're less prepared, and they go off the rails even further, because the parents so busy just keeping them away from bad things that they didn't even realize what the bad things are and what's out there and what they need to be aware of. You know, most kids who have a good understanding of the evil out there have what they call street smarts, and they have that because they were raised in difficult situations, and they've seen enough to understand people and bad situations and how to avoid them. And so, you know, you got to find that blend as a parent. You know, this, as we get into this week's Parashat, Yosef brings Ephraim and Manasseh. That's the 3rd generation, right? You have all 3 generations there. And you get this little switch where you get things in a different order. And then you get all of the kind of you could call them prophecies or realities of all of the children of Israel. And some of them are kind of negative, and some of them are positive. And so, you'd think the last things you were going to say about somebody wouldn't just be like, hey, this is a negative thing about him. That's all that's spoken about him, and then he's going to die. It's like, sometimes it's not all butterflies and flowers. But I think that you also see this idea of here's what's going to happen after death. And that's my third point for this week's message is that, number one, we talked about resting where you belong, understanding where you belong and where you don't belong. That's a big thing. All this Torah is going to teach you, right? You don't belong in Mitzrayim. You don't belong among the ways of the world. The ways of the world will entice you. There's a lot of things in the world that will entice people, whether it be riches, whether it be perversion, whether it be all kind of distraction even, things that just take you away from the things that matter. There's all kinds of stuff. And having a good head on your shoulders means understanding, you know what, I don't belong with that. I don't belong there. I don't belong with those people. I don't belong doing those things. That's a big piece to ensuring life, not just your life, but as you're teaching your children the same thing. And getting to that idea that there's a generation, the 3 generations that is passing away. There's a generation that's starting, and there's a generation that then will come up behind them, and that same relationship will happen. And I think that anytime you can, when you're parenting, you're parenting your grandchildren, and that's what you got to understand. You got to think ahead that way. And then there's after death, which is what happens when you're gone, and that also should be parented the entire beginning. I've always taught my kids that there'll come a time when I'm not there, and if they know that, then they can, number one, embrace the time that we do have, the blessing of the time that you have with your kids. I just see in society today, the kids are off doing their own thing with their friends and doing all that. And that's such a limited time that you have with your parents. Let's even say that the parents kick them out at 18. Then that time from, say, 13 to 18, that 5 years, the kids are busy doing their thing, dad's, working. Mom's maybe at home, maybe mom's working. Everybody's going their separate ways during that precious time. So I think that's a mistake. And the parents will go, hey, dad's going to make the money, for the kids who he's not there for because he's busy all day making money. The mom, she may be working too, chasing the money. They're both chasing the money instead of chasing the family. The family's their inheritance, right? And then the kids don't have a lot of that interaction with mom and dad because they're just both chasing money. Now the kid's lost. Now the kid's being raised by their friends, by the internet, by TV, the internet, who knows what. And then it's like, okay, cool. Now get out. And kid turns 18, he goes off. And it's like they still have that familial bond. It's just not that strong because they didn't cherish that time. They didn't value that connection, that handoff, right? An inheritance is just a handoff. It's one person dies and passes on something. So with the Leviim, it says they don't get a portion with Israel. It says Yorewahe is their portion, right? You see, it's the relationship they have. That's their inheritance. Parents need to understand that their kids are their inheritance. And kids really need to understand that their parents are also their inheritance, because it's what they get from their parents while their parents are still around and while they're still alive. Life does not get less complicated. You're not going to find more time. It accumulates. You have all the things you doing, all the things you want to do, you have to do. Then life does the things that throws in things that you have to deal with. Life throws in more things. It just stacks up and stacks up. I tell it to my kids all the time. You're never going to have more time than you do when you're a kid. So instead of wasting that time playing video games and doing stupid stuff, that's a great time to learn. You're going to want to learn things, when you're working, when you're doing other things, you're going to have less time. Then you're going to juggle everything. You're going to have your hobbies, you're going to have your work, you're going to have your family, other responsibilities that life throws at you. And what you're going to have is this tiny little sliver of time to do other things like learn or do this and that. Meanwhile, when you're young, you got all this time to spend making progress in areas of life that you're going to, you're going to get 1/10, 1/100th of that much time in the future to develop in those areas that you want. And that includes in developing the relationships with your family, whether it be your siblings. Look, they're going to grow up, they're going to get married, and then they're going to have kids and more responsibilities. You're never going to have more time with your siblings than when you're young. And yet, what's everyone do? Oh, I'm doing my thing, the other kid's doing their thing, parents doing their thing. Everything's divided at a time when everything should be more connected. Because that's the most time you're ever going to have to be that connected. And then you're going to have to work harder and struggle to stay connected as everybody's life accumulates, more responsibilities, more time. So this idea of ensuring life, right, starts from where do you belong, right? Goes through multiple generations. And then we're talking about after death. Because even it started that way, saying, after I die, makes him promise, you're going to bury me in the cave with my father's father, the place where we belong. He's returning home. And you see this in the Haftorah, King Dawid giving the final advice to Shlomo, his son, of what to do after his death, what to do with relationships of people who his father had interactions with, right? Same thing. You have Joseph's death, and then they're mourning, and then what happens after? And really, in the upcoming book of Shemot, Exodus, that is really Akrimot, after the death, right? Because all of this in these first books of the Bible are about a bunch of key people from Adam to Noach, right? Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Yosef, right? You got 6 key people from the beginning of creation and their stories and what happened to them. And it takes us all the way to the end. And then we get to the point where we now are dealing with Israel in Shemot and the new Paro and what's going to go there, and then the Exodus and all this. Very powerful things, very important things. But in this first book, we have creation, we have life, right? So it's really about ensuring life from the beginning of creation. Be fruitful and multiply, right? And the plants, they brought forth after its kind. Means after their kind. The fruit bearing seed, right? So this is about the continuation of life. That grows up, it has seed, the seeds are cast out, they multiply, those grow up in seeds, and that vegetation from the beginning of creation, it's the same way. Then we have man and woman, and then their procreating so that there's children, and that's the story of those children. And that goes back to that lesson. Cain and Havel, right? You have the first murder. You have jealousy. You have these things. And it's like, you assume because you think family is important that your children are going to understand the importance of family. But that's not exactly true. Just like you having a relationship with God does not ensure that they will have that strong relationship with God. As we see through the Torah, there's, righteous people, and then they have kids, and sometimes some of the kids aren't righteous. Some of them are. Some of them turn to wickedness, and some of them come back. Some of them turn to wickedness, and it doesn't come back for a few generations. This is the timeline, right? The whole thing is always about life, right? Moshe said, I set before you life and death, good and evil, right? Choose life. Life is a choice. Good is a choice. Evil is also a choice. Death is also a choice. And life, in its broader scope, is really the examination of what choices you'll make. What is the fruit of your choices? Is the fruit good things, holy things, blessings, or is the fruit of your choices evil? Is it destruction? Is it wickedness? You see, perversion. All of those things, are fruits of choices that people make. People can choose to be evil. People can choose to be good. You can be good and then choose to be evil and turn away from goodness. You can be evil and turn away from evil and start being good. That's what the great test of life is what choices are you going to make in different situations all throughout your life? What choices are your kids going to make in different situations all throughout their life? And then their children. And then after your death is another thing, right? Because it's one thing, and we see this with God, when God's walking among you, everybody's pretty strict, pretty dialed in, right? Think about Nadav and Avihu. They offered up a strange fire and were burnt on the spot. When you're in the presence of God, people really get that you need to be holy. When you're away from the presence of God, which reminds me, as Moshe said, how is it that we know that we have your favor? Is it not that you go among us? So you have a situation where when God is among you, you're probably going to be having to be more righteous. Just like when a parent's around. But then there's that transition to what happens when your parent's not there. Are you going to honor them? Like Mashiach, who says, not my will, but thy will. Or are you going to go astray? And you're going to bring dishonor to them. These are important things because at the end of the day, that's a different test. There's the test when the person who's the good influence, just like Moshe, when he went up to the hill, he leaves the people. When he's there, they're doing one thing. When he leaves, they're building the golden calf. So his presence there is important, but there's really two tests. Because there's the test of, will you do it when you're required to do it? And then what will you choose on your own when nobody's there to tell you what to do? What are your standards? And that goes back to what I said. There's my love for God, but that doesn't transfer to my kids. They got to have their own love for God. If they're hanging out, we're doing holy days and prayers and all that, it's like, I do those things. That's why you're doing them. But what are you doing if it wasn't that way? What are your personal... You have to be anchored in your own beliefs, right? You can't have somebody else's beliefs. That's the problem with a lot of the organized religions, that people show up, and then it's like they got somebody up in front of the room, and they're like, oh, well, the pastor, preacher, rabbi's up there teaching a lesson, and it's like they didn't do any study, but they just want to show up and eat off of someone else's plate. They just want to show up and listen to what the pastor studied. Right? That's laziness. Do your own study. You should have your own study. It's fine to learn from other people, but not in lieu of you doing your own study. In addition to your study, that's great. But if you're not doing any study and you're just hoping somebody else does it, that's not good. That's not going to be good for you, because you don't have a foundation. You don't have your own foundation. You need those skills, those muscles, that time in the Word of God. Otherwise, you're going to believe anything and everything. And that's going to, put you in a difficult situation. When I sit and I listen to somebody, or I read a post, it's like, oh, yeah, and everybody's like, oh, and they're clapping. And I'm like, how are you guys clapping? How is everybody clapping saying this is a great idea? It's clearly against the Torah. Here's why. This verse, this verse, this. But they don't know it. They clap because they're not aware enough in the Torah. They're not schooled enough from study of the Torah to understand why this is a terrible teaching. So the less you know, the more you're going to believe anything. And it's not going to be founded in the scriptures. That's why you have to have your own foundation. So when you listen to stuff, you go, okay. Many times I'll go into a social media post or something like that. And again, 20, 30 comments. Oh, yeah, this is so good. Oh, yeah, people believe that. And I'm like, not a single person wanted to bring up the fact that this violates this, and this in the Torah. I'm usually the only one who says something. And I don't say it for myself. I've already done my study. Because the person who they're listening to either didn't do their study enough, or they misunderstand it, or it's their opinion, and sometimes it's worse. Sometimes they just want to believe a certain thing. For whatever reason, they might be off. You can nail down, it's not just opinion. If someone wants to spend enough time in the scriptures, you can evaluate whether one person's idea is right or the other person. It's not like you just have to pick a side and, well, they're just two different opinions and da-da-da. No. Spend an hour, spend 5 hours, spend 5 days. We could drill it down. We can plot it all out on a chart or on a map and go, okay, you said this, but what about that? Okay, cool. That creates two new problems, okay? You're saying this, and I'm saying that. Now, here's all the supporting evidence for what I'm saying. How much, right, in the scales of balance, how much do you have supporting yours? Okay, let's go talk about those things. You said that this is true because you believe because of this. What does that word mean? Let's go and look at what that verse that you're talking about says and understand that verse here is connected to this verse over here, right? Like, you can map it all out and get down to the point where we're not arguing, we're just verifying. Because what I found is most people have bad ideas and bad theologies. It only goes about one layer deep. The text that they're trying to reference, they either misquoted or they didn't understand it, or, hey, if you apply what they say they think it means anywhere else, it doesn't work. It's not consistent. It goes against other things. It breaks other rules. Okay? The great thing about the truth is unified. It is ahad. It is connected to all the other truth. You don't get to have a little isolated truth and say, well, this violates all these other things, but if we just ignore all of those things, we can kind of make it seem like it's true just in an isolation over here. Nope, then you probably don't have it. Keep working on the problem. It's just like math. People give up on math because they don't have the patience to continue to work through the problem. That's people who are typically not going to do well in math or engineering or anything like that. That's why. But the people willing to stay there and work the problem until it's finished, those are the people who are going to succeed. And you got to be willing to do that. Most of these, again, terrible ideas, terrible things people are saying, they sound good. They totally don't work in the scriptures. It's like math. In math, you used to come up with an answer like an equation. But then you had to go plug in. You say, oh, okay, I think x equals 4. But then you got to take x equals 4. You got to take the 4 and go plug it back into the equation. And you can double check your work and say, yeah, does that work? I came up with the answer of what I think x is. But then most people, theologically, never go back, right? You just have people going, x equals 4. Okay, that sounds good. And everybody in the comments is like, yay! Oh, x equals 4, that sounds so good. It's like, no, it doesn't. Because if you plug 4 back into the equation, it doesn't work. But people are lazy. You gotta not be lazy. Okay? Don't be so quick to hand clap because it sounds good or it sounds right or because you're not skilled enough in the Torah to understand what's wrong with it. Right? Be a little bit of curious, I would say, with skeptical. To say, yeah, okay, maybe it's right. You got to change your equation. If it sounds right, it should be equals maybe it's right. Most people, if it sounds even close to okay, it's absolutely true. Not only that, they start sharing it, they start liking it, clapping it. They didn't take the time to realize that it's wrong. And then they just shared something that's wrong to other people who are going to share it to other people. You know, if everybody does that, then everyone's got the wrong answer. And nobody bothered to plug 4 back in to the formula and see if it actually works. So you really got to get in the habit. It says, as the Bereans did, who, they openly listened, right? And then they diligently went back to verify if those things were true in the scriptures or not, right? So it's like I listen to stuff all the time. People have all kinds of dumb ideas. Some of them aren't dumb. Some of them are absolutely terrible. I listen. Show me why you think that. The sky is green, not blue. Okay, why do you think that? 1 + 1 is 7. Why do you think that? And I listen fully, trying to believe it. Not trying to go, oh, 1 + 1 is 7. That's so stupid. Yeah, let me see you try and prove it to me. If you do that, most of those people who are obstinate, and I've seen it before, that's why it says you can't teach an old dog new tricks, because the old dog thinks it knows already. So you got to go in, even with the stupid stuff, and say 1 + 1 = 7. Okay, show me how that works out. I want to understand how 1 + 1 = 7. Because when it doesn't, when it really is stupid, even when you're trying to accept it, and they're trying to teach it to you, it won't work because it doesn't work. That means you really gave it a good shot, right? Because then I can say, well, I was trying to believe it, but it just doesn't add up, And even then, I'll put a little 5% on the shelf and go, maybe I'm just not, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just not ready for it. Maybe I'm not getting it, right? But it doesn't look like this works. I'm wanting to make it work. Most people, when they argue, they get in an argument about the scriptures. They're busy trying, like a shield and sword, trying to bang on the other person with their ideas. They're trying to strike the blow to the other person. I'm listening. I may push back. I'm trying to make what they are saying right. If it doesn't work because of another verse, then I have to go, well, what about this verse? Like you have to solve this problem that you're creating with your explanation for me. If they can't solve the problems, then they're getting an education on problems they didn't realize with their own theory. A lot of theories, it's like a math problem. You might try and solve it and you're not going to get the solution. You thought you had something until someone came up and said, yeah, but wouldn't that be a problem with this and this? And then they go, oh, I never thought about that. I never thought about it that way. Now, two types of people. One type of person defaults back to disbelief. They just don't want to believe that there's a flaw with their idea. They already kind of believed it once, and so it's like they already bought the lie, and so now they want to kind of pretend it's not a lie, and that, it's denial. You know what I mean? That's not someone who really loves the truth, and that's terrible. Because every idea that you have should be able to be tested. With you fully wanting to no longer believe your idea if it can be proven wrong. Right? That's a different attitude than I want to defend my belief at all costs because I think it's true. That's how most people argue. Whereas I want someone to beat up my idea, show me how it's wrong so I can reject it, because I would hate to be holding on to something that wasn't correct. And I'd love to fully embrace the correction and understand where I was wrong. Like, that's how I go into every conversation about the Torah. But most people, they're not going in that way. They're not coming in to learn anything. They're not coming in wanting to beat their ideas up. They're coming in as the super defender fighter with their ideas. And if you do that, you're going to get very little out of fellowship and very little out of interacting with someone who actually could help correct you, who could help get you on a better path, give you the wonderful blessing of more true knowledge, right? You have to be ready for that. And you have to be humble for that. You have to be willing to allow your understanding to be beat up, to be proven false. If it's false, you would want to know it. Don't defend a lie, right? You want to expose the lie so that you can find the truth, so you could trade for the truth. Get rid of the lie and trade for the truth. So, yeah, it's I know we went off on a little tangent here, but this is, you got to be willing to have that kind of thinking, that desire, because to ensure life, yeah, that's called the fear of Yodewahe. When you are worried that you're doing wrong, when you could be the most righteous person in the world and probably fear and trembling that you're not good enough, you're probably on the right track. Other people you meet, oh, I got this in the bag. Oh, no, I do this, I do that, just like the publican. Oh, I'm glad I'm not like him. I tithe twice, all that. And it's like, then you're blind to your own lies and inadequacy. You'd be better to go in. You could be the wisest person in the Torah, the smartest person in the Torah. You walk in as the humblest person in the Torah. I'm not sure. I don't know how many times I said, I need to study that out. The person, it doesn't mean I don't get it. It doesn't mean I haven't even studied it. I've probably studied upside down. But I respect the truth enough that if someone's going to challenge it, or someone brings something up, well, I can give you my opinion off the hip, but that's not very respectful. So a topic deserves proper research. They think they've already researched it. I can tell you after a few minutes, their level of knowledge on their thing that they're trying to pitch is not very deep. Very shallow. They do not understand it or the totality of the Torah very much at all. And then if I say, well, I need to study that out a little bit more, then they kind of like, yeah, you better study it out, because I know it, I'm smart and I got the right theory. The whole time I'm like, no, bro, you really don't. You really don't. Most of the things that you could categorize that you've said already are inaccurate and shallow and can be disproven. It's not a flex. Being a know-it-all is not a flex. Thinking you know it all, not a flex. Thinking that you're, I see these guys all the time. I go into different congregations. Oh, they studied this alternate text, and I've been studying the Greek. I learned at this school, and I went to seminary, and I go to these archaeological, and how many times have you been to Israel and Jerusalem and all that? And it's like all this big flex. And these people that are in the congregations that everybody's like, oh, they know so much. I mean, he told me all these things I never heard before. Someone could tell you 100 things you've never heard before, and they could be 100 wrong things. But that goes back to laziness, because the people are lazy. This person, they're like, oh, let them do another talk. I see it. I see it when they do on these, secret calendars and all this kind of stuff. This exotic doctrine stuff that people follow. And the person usually propagating it is the person who acts like they're the smartest. I sit there and have a conversation with them, and in 5 or 10 minutes, I can tell that they really don't understand that much at all about the scriptures. As a matter of fact, you fundamentally don't understand the scriptures. When you look into the sky, it's like the Qumran calendar people. When you look into the sky and you are celebrating a new moon 4 days before you're even at conjunction, when you're in a waning moon and you go, it's Yom Teruah, which is for the new moon, and the old moon is not even you're not even close. It's not like you're off a day. I've seen entire congregations celebrating Yom Teruah when there's still a waning moon out there that you can see with your physical eye, 4 days before it's even in conjunction. But because they got some guy who thinks he's super smart, understands the hidden secret priestly calendar and blah, blah, in this book, and we went to all this, they can do all the gymnastics they want and try and tell you that works. But anybody with a pair of eyes can look up and go, this can't be the new moon yet, because it's still last month. You can still see the waning moon. Okay? And then entire congregations follow along, and nobody stops to use common sense. I don't even need to have the conversation with the person who come up with that stupid idea. You know why? Because I have eyes. And I can look up there and go, no, that's definitely not a new moon. You're not even at conjunction, let alone a sliver of the moon. There's no newness to it when you're in last month. And if that's the fruit of all of your calculations, same with the lunar Sabbath people. 6 days you shall work. The 7th is a Sabbath. But then they think that the first of the month starts the thing, so you got 29 and a half days in the month. So you get to the end of the month, and they want it to divide equally by 7, so on the 28th they got a Sabbath, and a day and a half later they have another Sabbath. Where were the 6 days between Sabbaths as established in Genesis? But what they do is they do all this finagling. Well, what if this said this? And well, if this verse, and they try and take obscure verses out of context, and they try and create a Frankenstein theory. And because they do all this smoke and mirrors and like that, just like a street magician, then the people who don't study at all are sitting back going, oh, I've been doing it wrong? That's how it works? Because they can't disprove that person. And they can't disprove that person because they didn't study. And so they believe things that get them actually violating the Sabbath, both weekly and the holy days, which is a pretty big deal. So anytime somebody comes, and I've seen it, I've been Messianic for a long time. Anytime somebody comes along wanting to tell you about the secret calendars and the secret Sabbaths and this. Oh, we miscalculated time and all that. Like, it's a bigger conversation that I'm going to have right here because we only have about less than a minute left in this video. Don't stop. Before you stop keeping the Sabbath, right? Which is an important one. And the holy days, Yom Kippur, all the timing kind of matters. It's a kind of an important thing. Before you run out and throw out the Sabbath because somebody told you there's a hidden way, or you watched a DVD where someone, tried to paint this story to make it look a certain way. Just take a step back. If you don't understand enough why they're wrong, then you shouldn't be following them and saying that they're right. Okay? There's the golden rule. If you're not smarter than them, if you're not smarter than the person on the video telling you about some hidden secret idea and theology, if you're not smarter than them already and haven't studied it out on your own, then I probably wouldn't believe it, to be honest. Because you're probably incapable of knowing whether it's right or wrong. It's like a kid who doesn't understand how money works, and you're like, oh, okay, here, give me those 2 and I'll give you this 1. Or I'll give you these 2 pennies. There's 2. You give me that 1 quarter. It's like, oh, 2 instead of 1? They're like, this is great. Because they don't understand how money works. If you aren't smarter than the person who's bringing you the idea, you probably need to just wait until you get to it. If it's really the truth, you'll find it in your own Torah study. But if you're not doing that, and you just want to jump ahead and go, oh, well, this person, I saw this DVD, or I saw this YouTube video. Yeah, I didn't realize all these things. Don't let that be your source for, really fundamental knowledge. You should be studying for your fundamental knowledge. It should validate. If you came to that on your own, if you said, hey, I think we should be celebrating Hanukkah. I think it should be like this, and this is why. And I did all this research, and I saw all of that. Not because I knew anybody else ever did it. But then when I see, oh, it's a thing, and they're already doing that, then that validates what you believe. But most people who do that, who celebrate that, couldn't have come to that on their own. It was monkey see, monkey do. They saw somebody, they heard somebody said, oh, this is what we do, or this is what the Jews do, or this and that. Would you have gotten that from reading the Maccabees? Right now, a lot of people are saying yes. I would challenge that. I would love to talk to you about that. Why? Because it's not there. Even in the Maccabees. No miracle of oil in the Maccabees. There's no Hanukkah. There's no gift giving. There's what people are celebrating as Hanukkah. They could not have even gotten from just reading the book of the Maccabees. They wouldn't have started that practice. They started that practice because they're copying what they saw somebody else do. And they have no idea where it comes from or why they do it that way, what the traditions are. And at that case, it's no different than celebrating Christmas because your parents celebrated Christmas or somebody else saw it. Or, oh, the Kenny King is the shepherd's staff or whatever else you want to do. It's monkey see, monkey do. The problem with monkey see, monkey do in a religious context is that violates the commandments. The commandment says you shall not worship me as the other nations worship their gods. So if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, and if you can't clearly point to it and didn't get there by yourself, just with solo scriptura, the scriptures only, then you probably need to check yourself and reevaluate. Anyway, that's my message. We hit the mark here. Ensuring life. And it's all relevant. Even though we veered a little bit off track for a second on traditions and Torah study and Bible study, but actually that is totally relevant to the concept of this message, ensuring life. Because those are choices, and your choices matter. They have spiritual consequences. And so you better know why you're doing anything. And if you don't know, how are you going to teach your children? And teaching them to teach their children's children. It's a commitment. You're not going to get there by accident. You're not going to just, go along life and say, well, I believe this, and so my kids are going to believe. No, no, no. You have to be proactive. You have to take effort. You have to put in that effort for years and decades in hopes that you will ensure life, which is good choice making from you, passes on to good choice making to your children. And that passes on because they might make good choices and not be diligent in teaching their children. And as soon as you have a break in those 3 generations, it's game over. You may lose the Torah that you once had. Avraham followed God, but it could have been lost with Yitzhak. It could have been lost with Yaakov. It could have been lost with Yosef. It could be lost in any generation. And if you want to ensure life carries on, then you have to proactively make sure that you keep the commandments, that you teach your children to keep the commandments diligently, and teach them while they're a kid how to teach their future children how to keep the commandments. Hope this is a blessing to you. Till next time, I'll say